plight of Kurds in Iraq.
Without objection, that will be entered into the record and printed.
And I also would like to introduce into the record this book which shows the villages in Kurdistan which has been deported of its population, the date and the number of people who lived in the villages, the schools, the churches, the hospitals that has been destroyed by the government, and also the areas that has been Arabized, where the Kurds have been depopulated and non-Kurds have been replaced.
Dr. Kreem, earlier the Chairman Senator Pell had the same document and asked that it be made part of the files of the committee, and that will be done. And we thank you. We have 2 copies now, and that's you, Mr. Graham. We will return to your testimony. Grim account.
Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Kareem, do I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, sir.
Good morning, sir. Or good afternoon again, and proceed as you will, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, allow me to introduce into the records first a list of information about the plight of Kurds in Iraq.
Without objection, that will be entered into the record and printed.
And I also would like to introduce into the record this book which shows the villages in Kurdistan which has been deported of its population, the date and the number of people who lived in the villages, the schools, the churches, the hospitals that has been destroyed by the government, and also the areas that has been Arabized, where the Kurds have been depopulated and non-Kurds have been replaced.
Dr. Kreem, earlier the Chairman Senator Pell had the same document and asked that it be made part of the files of the committee, and that will be done. And we thank you. We have 2 copies now, and that's important.
Mr. Chairman, let me say for the record how much the Kurdish community in the United States of America, and indeed everywhere else, appreciate what you and your committee have done for them. The recently passed resolution by your committee to have Voice of America broadcast in Kurdish is a very important and necessary step to provide 25 million Kurds with accurate news and information in their own language, which does not exist in any part of Kurdistan. And your leadership in passing the resolution to impose sanctions on Iraq following its use of chemical weapons on the Kurds in 1988, and sending the fact-finding mission to Iraqi Kurdistan and to Kurdish refugee camps in Turkey.
May I say to you that that's very, very good to hear. Is that it's the first indication that anybody has taken official notice, you might say, of that was reported unanimously from the Committee on Foreign Relations.
Yes, and we greatly appreciate that, and it's very. It's indeed a great honor to speak before you today as a Kurdish American on behalf of the 4 million Kurds in Iraq who cannot speak to you on their own behalf. The Kurdish National Congress of North America, of which I am a member of the Executive Committee, is deeply grateful to your distinguished committee for the attention you have directed to the denial of Kurdish human rights in Iraq. A day does not go by that each one of us Kurds do not think of our family members now trapped in Kurdistan that's no longer theirs. A Kurdish nation that's brutally and systematically being forced into submission and extinction by all the governments that occupy it. Today the focus is on Iraq, a country whose oppression of the Kurdish people has gone beyond mere violation of human rights to a full-scale, systematic genocidal policy of eradication of the Kurdish identity within Iraq, and the elimination of any persons who oppose this policy. No policy of this scope is set in Iraq without the direct orders of Iraq's President Saddam Hussein. A full comprehensive account of many of the atrocities that have been and continue to be committed by the Iraqi government against the Kurds would take many hours to present, but are well documented elsewhere. The list of the crimes committed by the Iraqi government against the Kurdish population grows longer with each passing day, adding to an increasing body of evidence that reveals Iraq's intent to destroy Kurdish identity is more than the policy to stamp out and repress political opposition. It's a policy whose ultimate goal is the elimination of the 4 million Kurds and all things Kurdish from Iraq. The crimes committed by the Iraqi regime to eliminate political opposition the use of chemical weapons, the imprisonment, torture, and execution of suspected opponents of the Iraqi regime and their relatives, including infants and children, the assassinations and attempted assassinations of dissidents and Kurdish leaders outside Iraq are in themselves enough to justify the condemnation and boycott of Iraq, both economically and militarily, by the rest of the world community. But the slower, more insidious forms of Iraq's genocide against the Kurds, the policies against its own Kurdish citizens who are supposedly protected as citizens under the Iraqi constitution, are crimes as heinous and abhorrent as its more flagrant abuses of human rights. Among these are, number one, 4,000 Kurdish villages and towns have been destroyed and leveled. There are no villages left in Kurdistan. A militarized zone of
There are no villages left in
Kurdistan. A militarized zone of 20 to 30 kilometers wide has been established along Iraq's borders with Turkey and Iran in Kurdish areas only. Anything moving in this area is shot on the spot. Some estimates place the number of Kurdish villages deprived of their homes, land, livestock, property, and livelihood at very least at 500,000. That's a conservative figure. Number two, displaced Kurdish villagers have been forced to live in camps located near larger population centers, Erbil, Suleymaniya, and Duhok. Others were dispersed to the southern deserts and others to unknown locations. All camps are located next to heavy armed Iraqi army garrisons. The camp inhabitants are at the mercy of the Iraqi government to provide them with food. There is no means of economic support for them. Some of the camps have no water. Even the wells dug there were dry. 3. Dislocated Kurds are prohibited from visiting their villages of origin. For example, Kurds from Sinjar cannot go back to Sinjar. Number 4. Kurds are prohibited from buying land in areas targeted for Arabization, such as Kərkuk, Sinjar, Khanaqin, Sheikhan, Tuz-Khurmatu, and Kifri, and other places. 5. An Iraqi Arab who marries a Kurdish woman is paid 500 Iraqi dinars by the government of Iraq. 6. The Kurdish land has been damaged environmentally. There is a massive project to divert water from Kurdish areas. Natural springs in Kurdish areas have been plugged by cement. Trees have been cut and roots poisoned so that they will not grow back again. 7. Kurdish students are not admitted to military or police academies nor to college of education unless they are members of the Arab Baath Socialist Party. Number 8. All teachers must become members of the Arab Baath Socialist Party to keep their job. The Iraqi government's intrusion into every aspect of every citizen's daily life is beyond comprehension of persons who have grown up and live in the free society. They have even sent Iraqi agents into refugee camps to intimidate the Iraqi Kurds in Turkey. They succeeded in poisoning the bread given to the refugees. 2,000 persons fell ill. Kurdish refugees who accepted Iraq's offer of amnesty and returned to Iraq have never been heard from again. As Kurds, we are grateful to those who at last are telling the alarming story that needs to be told about Iraq. But for the 150,000 Kurds still in refugee camps in Turkey and Iran, words are not enough. For the 4 million Kurds inside Iraq today, words are not enough. Their very lives, their culture, their heritage, their identity, their future, and the future of their children is in jeopardy. We therefore ask for the following actions be taken, if you allow me, Mr. Chairman.
Please do. Doctor.
Number 1, we ask that the U.S. grant refugee status to the Kurdish refugees from the Turkish and Iranian camps and admit those who wish to come to the United States. We have compiled a list of the people who have relatives in this country and are willing to come here. We ask that the U.S. grant political asylum in the United States to those Kurds who seek it. We ask that the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad grant visas to those Kurds who wish to visit their relatives in the U.S. or seek medical care in this country. 2. We ask that the U.S. use its influence and put pressure on the governments of Turkey and perhaps on Iran, which may be more difficult, and work with the United Nations High Commission of Refugees and with the International Red Cross and other organizations to improve the condition of the refugees in the refugee camps. Kurdish refugees in Iran are not forced to remain in camps like they are in Turkey, but most have been forced to become beggars in the streets for lack of food. Just this week we learned that 3 Kurds who have been arrested in Diyarbakir, Turkey for attempting to deliver $6,000 to the refugees which have been donated by the Kurds in the United States and elsewhere. About a month ago, a Kurdish medical student in Diyarbakir, Turkey publicly burned herself to death to call the world attention to the plight of the Kurdish refugees. Unfortunately, this received little notice. 3. We asked that the position of observer status be created for Kurdistan in the United Nations like that has been created for the Palestinians. We asked that a session of the United Nations be devoted to a discussion of the Kurdish issues as was proposed by the late Dr. Andrei Zakharov in the Paris Conference on the Kurds. 5. We ask that the U.S. exert pressure on Iraq to compensate those Kurds who have suffered from its chemical weapon attacks and forced dislocations, that Kurds be allowed to return to their villages and rebuild them, that their human and ethnic rights be respected. And last, we ask that the U.S. discontinue its credit to Iraq through Import-Export Bank and impose military and economic sanctions on Iraq until its genocidal policies are discontinued, compensation paid, and human rights restored to all Iraqi citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Karim. Thank you particularly for the specifics that you put before us. I mean, you give us decisions that we have to make. And I must say I'm very impressed by those particulars. But let's first hear from Professor Milholland, and good afternoon to you, sir. Thank you for being patient. You're the cleanup hitter.